Goeiedag, good day, fellow South Africans and citizens of the world.
I've been looking around for salvation. I've been looking around for the truth. All around me I see frustration, and I looked all over till I found you. I sit and listen to your stories, and you're telling me, please don't worry. Lot in this world you should know, and love in life is where you should go. If you're looking for somewhere to go, if you're looking for someone to know, if you're looking for someone to guide you, then love in life will guide you.
Goeienaand, good evening, fellow South Africans and citizens of the world. Well, it's all happening. It's all happening. We had a live stream this morning covering the first arrest of truckers in Canada, and within an hour of that, guess what happened? The website entirely was taken down. But we'll be talking to Rudy about that in a few seconds. Now, just to demonstrate to you how totally invasive the New World Order is now becoming, have a look at these two images. Firstly, Standard Bank of South Africa. If you have a contract working for them, cleaning or whatever it might be, by early April, anyone coming into a Standard Bank to do work has to be triple vaccinated. Yeah, I'm not joking, triple vaccinated. And good old Jacinda Ardern, look at this. This is a fine for someone who refused to take a PCR test. Now, what are the conditions? If they don't pay the fine, they're going to be restricted. They won't be able to fly out of the country. Think about it. This is the sort of crap that the New World Order are bringing into play now, around the world. This is how they're starting to control. Remember, back in early 2020, March 2020, it was going to be 2 weeks of lockdown to flatten the curve. My gosh, we've come a long way since then, haven't we? Let's never forget that that was the reason they said they were going to bring in the lockdown. It's a scam. Anyway, let's continue. All right, now, excuse me. Not only was the website for Loving Life down, but guess what else is down right now? The radar service for the Australian government. This is for the weather. Currently unavailable due to, and they say they've got technical problems. You wonder what is going on. I have never seen that before with the weather radar. All right, now before I get our guest on, that's Jan Lamprecht, I'm going to get Rudy on because we need to understand what happened earlier today, because it was not an accident. As I mentioned just now, it happened an hour after we went live with the arrest of the first truckers in Ottawa, and then all of a sudden it was pulled out. Here we go. Hi, Rudy.
Hello, Scott.
How are you, buddy?
Fine and you?
Excellent, excellent. Now, Rudy, we had a little problem with the website about 6 a.m. or before 6 a.m. this morning, South African time. Can you tell us what happened, what your interaction is with the people who host our website?
Yeah, actually, we've been under a bit of attack already since October last year. But let me deal with this morning's outage first. Unfortunately, like most websites, we also have a contact us page that has a contact form built into it where people can directly email you from the website itself. And the crawlers and spiders and bots, and you can take it for granted, some manufactured by more than just crawlers and bots and so on, started attacking the contact us page, spamming that email as much as possible. So what happens is your hosting company, if you've got a reputable hosting company, they will see what is happening, and to safeguard their systems as well as your website, they will take evasive measures, and the evasive measures that they take would be to suspend your domain or your website, so that nobody can get in, even the owners of the website. So this morning, you Skyped me at about 7:30 South African time, if I'm correct.
About that, yeah.
You alerted me to the fact that the website was down. I immediately came to my office and I started investigating, and very quickly realized that this was from the web hosting side of things. And I contacted them via their live chat functionality on our account. And you know, our web hosts sit in the USA, so I got hold of some Indian guy who works at their call center
in Mumbai,
somewhere in the small hours of the night. But you know, those call center guys are just, they just sort out minor issues, and it very quickly became apparent that the actual, what they call the service assurance team at the web host had suspended our functionalities. Now that sounds easy to remedy and so on, but basically because they sit in the US, I had to wait for their regular technical team to arrive American time in the morning when they get to the office. So we were down for quite a number of hours. In the meantime, I convinced that junior techie to at least give me access on my IP address to get into the systems and to address some of the issues regarding this mass spamming effort. So they did that, and I could go into the website as well as the back end of the website. And it was actually quite simple. I just removed the contact form from the contact us page, did a couple of other tweaks and things. And you know, the reason why the spam got through was sort of, how can I say, half my fault and half practicality, in the sense that, you know, our regular users that we have on Loving Life, some of them are not very technically oriented. Up to this day, I still get 3 or 5 emails per day from people who reply directly on the daily newsletters, with due regard to the fact that we warn them in the first paragraph not to reply on those daily newsletters and so on. So, you know, I've had to balance ease of use and compare that to security issues. And the ideal thing would be, or would have been, to build in what we call a captcha into that contact form, so that the normal bot or robot or crawler couldn't send an email to that email address, they would have to prove that they are human. We've all seen on some websites, they ask you what is 1 plus 7, and if you don't answer that correctly and you press submit, the request can't go through, or they ask you to rearrange little animals, or whatever the case may be. Those are all forms of capture to make the person do something to prove that they are indeed human. I chose all that time ago not to make it too difficult and not to. Hello, Scott.
You're okay. Yeah, we can hear you.
So I chose not to do that for ease of use. But now with this attack happening, once I enable the contact form again, rest assured there will be a capture portion built into it. So that was the big issue, and basically by, I think it was about 2:45 this afternoon, the senior techies at our web host in the USA were at the office, and they unsuspended our account, and the website was back up and running. So not a major issue, you know, the website was still there. It was just this little spamming issue that took a number of hours to sort out due to the fact that the right people weren't at the office. But that's not the only place where we've been attacked. Specifically with relation to the daily newsletter that goes out, a lot of the viewers in the side chat, you know, I'm just from the top of my head, I think John Hart would be one of them, and a number of the others. Some of the email service providers from October last year have been marking all Loving Life TV's emails that go out and that tries to get into our subscribers and so on as spam, or as not available. So as far as I'm concerned, that's a concerted effort by big tech in the form of the major email service providers that are trying to silence Loving Life TV or not let them reach their audience. So it started out with all the emails in October, people who have Yahoo email addresses, Proton Mail email addresses, Sky email addresses, and then it spilled over to some of the other service providers, MWeb in South Africa, Telkom SA, iAfrica, and a number of the other providers. And of course, these big organizations, you might have a website or domain hosted by, say, MWeb or iAfrica or whatever, and even then your email address at your domain would be prevented from going to you. So that affects about 5% of our subscribers. And I was getting all the bounce backs from those emails not arriving at the subscribers, and you could well imagine me receiving over 1,000 bounce back emails per day from the daily newsletter that didn't reach their intended target. So, you know, getting rid of all those bounce backs forces one to be a bit radical, and where the bounce backs came back that email addresses did not exist, I simply went and deleted those subscribers whose email addresses do not exist. So when you do register, or when you do now re-register, remember, I'm going to catch you out. If you've got a non-existing email address, your account will just be deleted. And then those who are with some of the major service providers who have blacklisted Loving Life TV and so on, you know, those subscribers, I have I've taken it to task to unsubscribe them myself from the newsletter so that I don't get a daily bounce back from their email address. So if you've got a Yahoo email address and you're registered on the system, or an MWeb one or a Proton Mail one, know for sure that I've unsubscribed you from the daily newsletter. You wouldn't have received it anyway, but it saves me that trouble of getting your bounce back. So we've been attacked, but we're riding with the punches, and altogether, there's about 7% of people who have unsubscribed from the daily newsletter themselves, who don't want to get the daily newsletter, and then there's about the 5% of people who are blocking the Loving Life TV daily newsletter. So it's not a train smash. We're still reaching 88 or 90% of our subscribers every day with our daily newsletter. So yeah, the attack is ongoing, but the work continues, and we have plans for all of these things that happen.
All right. Thanks, Rudy. Thanks for coming on.
All right, Scott, is that all you need me for tonight?
That's all, yeah. Thanks, buddy. We'll chat later.
Basically, the website is fully functional, back on. Enjoy it, and we're continuing to monitor things on this side.
Okay, buddy.
Okay.
All right, guys. That was Rudy just giving us an update on what's happening behind the scenes. Just before I bring Jan on, I should mention that if you don't get the daily newsletter, just go to the homepage of Loving Life, and just above where you register to log in, you'll see there's a link where you can every day just click on that. And once I've actually sent out that daily newsletter, that link will take you to that same set of links for that day. So just go to the homepage, click on that link, and you'll see what people get anyway. The other advice I give is if you've got, let's say, a Yahoo email account, if you open up, for example, a Gmail email account and register that, you will get the daily newsletter. Okay, so let's move on now, because I've got Jan Lamprecht waiting in the wings. But before I bring Jan on, just by way of introduction to our subject, which is PW Botha, let me play this short video. This is related to his court case following his refusal to go to the that special conference where there were, I've forgotten the words, but it's that trial and something. Here we go. Anyway, you'll see about it in here.
Meneer Botha, kom gesels met ons. Mr. Botha. Mr. Botha.
Baie welkom hierso. This country is in confusion. Go and ask the citizens of this country, and they will tell you that they are not satisfied with what is going on all levels of government. And it is a lovely country. It is a country full of hope. And I hope that sense and justice will prevail. I am the accused, and I have the right to be protected by the court. Is that right? But untested accusations have been made by a witness without being cross-examined. While his untested witnesses, evidence, was distributed right through the world. I saw it on television. Now I say it is my right as a citizen of South Africa that my law advisors shall continue to cross-examine the witness as well as his chairman of the commission, Bishop Tutu, who is the chairman of the commission, and that he shall also appear before court to be cross-examined. I had an opportunity in my office here to tell Mr. Mandela, but apparently he's a captive. He's a captive of the cabal, and he's a captive of interests from which he cannot escape.
Why are they going after you like this, though?
He is a decoy dove. You know what a decoy dove is? That is what he is.
Why do you think that they are going after you? Why do you think they've picked on you, sir?
Because they want to destroy the image of my people. And they want to destroy my image, and through me, to humiliate my people.
Okay, guys, that was PW Botha, and wow, what a very astute man he was. He talked about the cabal. You know who the cabal are, don't you? The New World Order. That's who Mandela was a front for. And the court case was related to his refusal to appear before the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Sorry, I had a bit of a brain blank there for a second. All right, now just before I get our guest Jan Lamprecht on, I just want to read a message that was put in the side chat at the very start of the side chat, and it was from Estelle Deventer. And Estelle writes, "Hi, Loving Life. This should be interesting. My brother was one of the directors who advised Mr. Botha. My brother also authored a book on Mr. Botha, who is known as Die Groot Krokodil." Now, Estelle, I'd love to know who your brother was. I'm going to be just raising that with Jan Lamprecht, who I'm going to get on now. Here we go. Hi, Jan. Hello, Jan.
Hi there, Scott. My mute was off. My
Not
camera should be on.
No, your camera's
I
off at the
pressed
moment.
the button.
There we are. Now I see you. Okay,
Yes.
perfect. Now, Jan, I was just saying that there's a lady in the side chat whose brother wrote the book Die Groot Krokodil. Now, that was the book about PW Botha, but perhaps you'd like to just sort of say hi in case her brother is sitting there with her.
Hello. Nice to meet you. Good to hear that somebody who knew him is in the audience. That's excellent.
Now, Jan Botha and his wife Elise retired to their home Die Anker in the town of Wilderness, 16 kilometers from the city of George, and located on the Indian Ocean coast on the Western Cape. That's where you first actually met PW. You were fishing, weren't you, or something like that, and he walked up to you. So tell us what happened.
No, it's actually very different. No, what happened was I was running my African Crisis website, and I'd been running it since 2001. And in the year 2000, I was working on my book, Government by Deception, which was my warning to the whites of South Africa. So my website took a while to get going, and it took a lot of heat, I must tell you. And by about 2006, I began to hear from people that PW's wife was active on the internet because his first wife died, and he married another woman named Barbara.
Right.
So we began to hear that Barbara Botha is on the internet. So at a point, I decided, let me just try and take a chance and see if we can get hold of her email address. And we managed to do that. And then I wrote her an email, and I asked her if I could send PW a copy of Government by Deception. So I sent off the copy of Government by Deception with a covering letter or whatever. And to be honest with you, I never really expected to hear anything from them, because one of the problems that I always suffered from, apart from specific military contacts that I had, on the whole, Rhodesians and South Africans who were politicians or people in high places or people of note never came and responded to me or wanted to deal with me in public. So I didn't expect to hear anything further. But the next thing was that I got an email from her, and she said that PW liked the book and so forth. And then what happened was she phoned me the one day, and this was in April of 2006. I knew him from April until he died, which was, I think, near the end of October. But anyway, she phoned me, and she said that he liked my book and everything's nice and so forth. And then she said, you know, he's here, he'd like to talk to you. So he spoke to me for a few minutes, said hi, etc. And that was really awesome for me. Anyway, I went and I mentioned this on my website, and she was friendly and she was writing stuff back. And then one day he phoned me to talk to me specifically about a topic. And we must have talked for an hour. And I went and grabbed a notebook and I started making notes. And then I wrote it down and I wrote it up on my website and so forth. And when I published it, I sent the link to his wife. She was the one who was active on the internet. And what she did was she would print the stuff out because he was 90 years old. So she would print the stuff out and give it to him, and he'd read it. And in the day, he'd sit in his chair by the window, and he would read things. Anyway, he liked he liked the fact that I wrote exactly what he said, that I didn't take journalist license, I didn't twist things, I just wrote the facts. And then he started phoning me more and more. And he would phone me, and then he'd phone again for like an hour, and we'd talk, and I'd make notes, and I'd write it on my website, and I'd publish it, and I'd send a copy to his wife, and he'd check it, and so it went on. And then after this had gone on for quite some time, I then got a request from her saying that they'd like to invite me to their house. So they invited me to their house for October, and we sort of planned the whole thing, hush, etc. And there were some strange things that started happening. Like just a week before I went to his house, all of a sudden there was a medical emergency, and suddenly they rushed him to the hospital, saying that he might have some kind of heart problem, and it was all over the news. And then he came back after spending like a day or two in the hospital. It was on a weekend. And then he came back and they said, no, all was well. And I came about the next week. I think it was the very next week I ended up there. So we planned it, and I stayed there for 5 days. And in those 5 days, we had a bunch of further discussions. I took photos while I was there, and I also made notes. In fact, I'm sitting with my notes. I've got about 16 pages of notes that I made while I was there at his place talking to him. So the other thing also.
Yeah, carry on.
The other thing I also want to mention to you is when all of this is due to you doing these interviews with me. I began to think that we're talking to a South African audience, got a lot of Boers in the audience, and I began to think that I really need to pull out my archives so that I can pull out the old data so that I can go through various things like this with you.
Yeah.
And in the last month, I actually pulled out my archive, which I haven't looked at in over a decade. I managed to recover from my database 110,000 articles.
Wow.
That is the total number of articles I had on my original website. My current African crisis only has 3,900 articles on, and my history review's got 24,000. But my original African crisis, 110,000 articles with lots of stuff there. And I was actually I spent the last couple of weeks pulling it out and beginning to start searching and looking around so that I could start checking dates and checking articles, because there's a bunch of stuff that I think you will find useful on your show for your audience. And the very first thing I wanted to tackle was PW Botha. So I will also be trying to get my 110,000 articles back on the internet so people can search it. Because while looking through the stuff, I was checking things I wrote, links I had, etc. And I want to tell you that most of the websites that I was linking to no longer exist. There were Afrikaans websites, there were all kinds of websites that I was dealing with, and I used to publish articles, but luckily I came up with the strategy early on that I never just post links, because websites might disappear. And boy, did that work out to be the better way to go. Yeah. I've got tens of thousands of articles from websites that no longer exist.
Yeah. Look, I know exactly what you're talking about. My gwb.com.au domain dates back to 1995. That's nearly 30 years, and I can tell you now an enormous amount of the links in the old articles I wrote are gone. You know, they just page does not exist. Now, and that's a tyranny of the internet, and we had a tyranny earlier today where the entire Loving Life website was taken down, and we just talked about that, and I do apologize for the delay on bringing you on, but people need to know what happened. Now, let's get back to PW Botha, and I want to talk specifically about his role as the Minister of Defense, because he was the Minister of Defense for a long time, and under him, South Africa, or the South African Defense Force, reached its zenith. I mean, it had the most powerful army, the most powerful navy, the most powerful air force, the weapons they were developing in South Africa under the now completely stuffed, what's it? Denel, that's it, yeah. I mean, but what they were producing was amazing. And under Botha, they also manufactured 6 nuclear weapons. Now, the story is that those were they were taken apart in the late 1990s. Were they actually destroyed? Do you know? Did he talk to you about them?
Yes, he did discuss that. And yes, they were destroyed. They were actually destroyed at the request of the CIA. The CIA actually did not want the nuclear weapons to fall into the hands of the ANC. Can you believe? So that is the actual reason why they were destroyed. The SADF, his Minister of Defense role, that is the time of his life that he himself said he enjoyed the most. And he is actually responsible literally for the SADF becoming the awesome machine that it became. Yeah. I must tell you that in South Africa, the first automatic military rifle that came out of South Africa was the R1. And the R1 was based on the Belgian FN rifle, which was the rifle for NATO. And that process actually started in the 1960s already under Verwoerd. And so anyway, in PW's time, they built up the SADF. I recall PW Botha coming to Rhodesia and wanting to help the Rhodesians in our final days. Unfortunately, by then it was too late, but he was very friendly and we liked him. But he was very proud of that time in the SADF. And later on, I also read that he authorized the use of the Olifant tanks in Angola. And at a point when the generals were battling up there, he even chided them and said to them, but I'd given you guys authorization. You can use the tanks anytime you want. So he was very proud of his time in the SADF. And he even at a point mentioned to me that he felt that the SADF was more than capable of taking on the Russians.
Wow.
He was very proud of the SADF, really. Yes,
Well,
he was very proud of it.
well, I mean, the ANC never ever fought the SADF. They were sitting in the background. But that is true.
Exactly.
Now, just while we're talking about the military aspect, did PW ever discuss any of the generals in the South African Defence Force?
Yes, he did talk about various generals. One guy who was his good friend was General Constant Viljoen, and Constant Viljoen would phone him, would come and visit him quite regularly, etc. He told me that I think Constant Viljoen and Nelson Mandela pitched up there one day, talking to him. I'm not sure if that was the discussion when Nelson Mandela asked him to return to politics. But there was a visit by Nelson Mandela where Mandela specifically requested that PW Botha return to politics and return to leading the National Party. Can you believe? This is after de Klerk. And that in and of itself is a very interesting thing. One of the things that PW Botha told me about Constant Viljoen is that at a point, this is the point where Constant Viljoen went off and created, what was it, the Freedom Front. PW Botha said to me that he told Constant Viljoen not to create a political party, but to create a cultural organization. He didn't define it more broadly than that. And, you know, there are a bunch of things that I must tell you. In my discussions with PW Botha, there are many things where only in later years did I manage to truly grasp some of the stuff he was trying to tell me. Because he told me all sorts of things, some of which just went over my head. And later on, when I dug into history more, then suddenly the penny would drop, like with the Portuguese. There were things he told me about the Portuguese and so forth that didn't quite make sense. And then later I realized, this must be what he was meaning. So he didn't define clearly what he meant by a cultural organization. But I think what he was out to do was he wanted the Boere to basically stick together and to not give up on their culture or their language or anything. And in fact, at the end of this interview, I've got another surprise for you. I've got the very last interview that PW Botha ever gave to any journalists, and I'm going to release it on my website immediately after this, and I'll send you and Natalie and Marlena the links.
Fantastic.
And you can listen to his very last interview done in January 2006.
Yeah, well, look,
I think you're going to be in for some surprises.
We'll put that underneath the video in the description. And just don't let your website go down, or it'll be another one of those links that says no page or something.
Don't joke with me like that, Scott. I must tell you, I myself got an email this week that is unsettling me in a big way.
What was
I'm very worried about my own websites. I got an email from the hosting company, and there have been changes at the hosting company, and there are new owners. And I must tell you, I've had my websites taken down before, and this hosting company is known for its freedom of speech. And I'm actually very worried as to whether the new owners are going to change policies, because I saw this happening on that video website Rumble. Rumble was recently bought out as well, and immediately they banned my channel, and they started banning people. So I'm actually very worried, because my website's been taken down several times, not just by hackers, but by hosting companies just shutting them down. And so I'm going to start with immediate effect looking for new places to host, because my setup is quite complicated, and if I can even find somebody who will host it, it could take me weeks to set up my stuff. I'm very, very concerned that this is the beginning of the end on this particular hosting company.
Yeah, well,
So
look,
I'm actually quite depressed about it, actually.
Jan, I'll put you in touch with Rudy and with Gareth. They're both Gareth, I believe, has got a hosting company. He's someone who works on Loving Life TV, and Rudy can probably give you advice on where to get a new host, because what's happening now is the censorship taking place on the internet is becoming absolutely extreme. Okay, let's just get back to
Yes.
to PW Botha. Yeah, sorry, carry on.
And the other general I must mention is General Constant Viljoen. Sorry, not Constant Viljoen. I meant Magnus Milan. Sorry. Magnus Milan, who was the head of the SADF, he also used to phone Magnus Milan. Magnus Milan would phone him as well. Sometimes they would chat while I was sitting in the lounge. He'd be on the phone to him. But at the time that I visited, Magnus Milan's book had just come out in English and Afrikaans. And PW Botha was looking through Magnus Milan's book, reading various parts of it, and he was saying to me, man, this book is good. He says, this book is good, and this book tells the truth. And he would phone Magnus Milan, and he'd praise him over the book. And then PW Botha said something. He said, this book, Magnus Milan's book, is going to cause a stir. But unfortunately, PW Botha did not realize how bad the liberal mass media really is. And if they don't like something, they don't even publish a word about it.
Yeah.
And so, of course, the stir that he predicted never took place because the liberals don't mention Magnus Milan's book. But he told me that everything in Magnus Milan's book is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So he loved it.
Right. Now, you mentioned about the cultural side that PW Botha was trying to bring into South Africa. Earlier, he had been looking at setting up a tricameral parliament with a white-only House of Assembly. The House of Representatives would be for coloureds, and the House of Delegates for the Indian population. And of course, for the various Bantu ethnic groups, they would have Bantu stands. Now, the three chambers of the tricameral parliament had sole jurisdiction over matters relating to their respective communities. What happened to that idea that he had?
To be honest with you, I never really dug into the tricameral parliament and those things. All I can tell you is that PW Botha did take pride in the fact that he was responsible for reform in South Africa. But one of the things you must be careful about regarding PW Botha is that in the 1980s, when he was the prime minister, and he changed it from prime minister to president as well, right. When he was the president, during that time, that is when South Africa got lots of heat. You know, if the 70s was the time of the heat for Rhodesia, the 80s was the time of heat for South Africa.
Yes.
And in that video that you will see, PW Botha talks about a concept called the total onslaught. And that total onslaught is something that I think the white South Africans do not fully appreciate. And the leaders themselves, including PW, did not fully describe and warn the people of how bad the pressure is against South Africa. So there was tremendous pressure. And in that interview, PW Botha says that the enemies of South Africa were the communists, the Soviet Union, Cuba, and their allies, which of course included China and the Warsaw Pact. But he also said some Western nations. But he never tells you which Western nations are our enemies. So there were some Western nations that were openly hostile to us, but we who live here don't. We're never told we were never told things like, oh, Britain or Sweden or that European country is actually at war with us. Those things were never told to us. So you got to understand there's this thing called the total onslaught. It's more than just the terrorist war. The ANC is being assisted by other countries, including Western countries. And so PW Botha was under a lot of pressure to do reform. So he's proud that he did reform, and yes, he was responsible for giving the coloreds the vote and the Indians the vote and giving them the ability to start dealing with their affairs. But never at any time was he going to just hand the country over to the blacks, especially the ANC. And one of the things that PW Botha made clear is that he actually, I think when Nelson Mandela was in jail, Nelson Mandela at one point asked to meet PW Botha, and he allowed him to. And he told Nelson Mandela that he would let him out of jail on one condition. He must in public renounce violence. And Nelson Mandela never renounced violence. And that is why PW Botha never let him out of jail. But F.W. de Klerk did. So that is where PW Botha is different. PW Botha tried to retain white power as much as he could while sort of quietly introducing things like capitalism. Like, I don't know if you know, but PW Botha is responsible for the black taxi industry. He's actually the guy who created the black taxi industry in South Africa. He instituted that thing under apartheid, and he allowed blacks to own taxis. They went and they dug into the issue of what would work for them, and it was whites who came up with the idea that these minibus taxis would work. When the black taxi thing was created, or the industry was created, only black people were allowed to own those taxis. But I know from that time that secretly whites and blacks were owning taxi organizations in violation of the fact that whites were not supposed to own taxis. But the taxi industry in South Africa, which I think then spread to the rest of Africa, is a creation by P.W. Botha. So he did various things, but all the things he did fell into the concept of, which we will discuss as time further on, his idea of what he called a confederal system. P.W. Botha never believed in a single country run from a central government. He did not believe in that, and there was no ways he was going to do that. He believed in splitting up the country into what he called a confederal system, the same as Switzerland and Belgium.
Right.
And then in there, all the different groups would have their pieces of territory, their parliaments, etc. So what he did with the Indians and the coloreds was probably the beginning of that.
Yeah, so
in the same way that
saying,
the homelands were the beginning of that.
What we're saying, Jan, it's rather like the European Union of today, where you've got like a central government, but you've got independent states within that country.
Yes, it's like America before the Civil War. That was also functioning on a confederal system. In America, the term they use is states' rights. A state had more rights than the central government, and that's how it used to be. A state can override the central government, and P.W. Botha believed that sort of system, in that system, the whites, especially the Boere, would be fitting somewhere in that system. They would have their state too.
Now, I think it was P.W. Botha who famously is on record of saying that South Africa would never prosper under a black government. He said they would be incapable of running a country like South Africa. I might be wrong with that, but did PW Botha ever say?
Did.
Sorry, carry on.
No, finish. Just
finish.
Okay.
Did PW Botha ever say anything about Nelson Mandela or any of the other black presidents of South Africa? But yeah, just over to you.
Okay. Yes. He spoke quite a bit about Mandela, and it's very interesting. You know, again, if you look at F.W. de Klerk, the guy who gave the blacks everything on a plate, the guy who just threw the country into the rubbish bin without even attempting to stop it. If you look at him, you would think that the blacks would like F.W. de Klerk more than P.W. Botha, but in actual fact, the blacks, especially Mandela, seem to have much more of a respect for him. I don't think Mandela liked him, but Mandela treated him with respect in a way that very possibly F.W. de Klerk was never treated. For example, he told me that Mandela came to visit him at his house twice. And at his house, the Anker, he had a guest book. And he opened the guest book and he showed me Nelson Mandela's signature. Nelson Mandela's got quite a nice signature, actually.
Yeah.
And he told me also that Nelson, as I've mentioned, Nelson Mandela asked him to come back into politics and to lead the National Party. This is, I think, after... I'm not sure what year this was, but he later also said that Nelson Mandela once was in Mozambique, and he phoned him from Mozambique, and he thanked him for what he did for Mozambique, because P.W. Botha actually stopped the war in Mozambique, something that I differ on. It's a topic for another day, but I did discuss this with him, and yeah, Mandela thanked him for what he did in Mozambique, because the Inkomati Accord actually stopped South Africa and Renamo from waging a war in Mozambique. Now, another thing about Mandela that he said to me on more than one occasion, he said to me that he had face-to-face discussions with Mandela in his house, and that as far as he's concerned, Nelson Mandela is a communist and he is a terrorist. And he made that quite clear. He spoke about Thabo Mbeki. Thabo Mbeki was the guy that the liberals loved to bits after Mandela was the president. But I personally detested Mbeki. Mbeki started out as quite anti-white, and he later toned down his statements. And what many whites don't know is that Mbeki is responsible for allowing Robert Mugabe to get away with the total destruction of the whites of Zimbabwe. Oh. Mbeki was an evil, evil bastard of a man. I hated him. If they tell you that Zuma was worse or this or that, let me tell you, these ANC leaders, the one is the same as the other one, hey?
Yeah.
Mbeki was a snake. But anyway, P.W. Botha said that he'd never met Mbeki himself, but he said that from his assessment of Mbeki, that Mbeki was also a communist. And another point that P.W. made was that neither Mandela nor Mbeki or any of the ANC leaders ever tell the black people to stay away from communism. They never tell the blacks that.
Yeah.
And so he reckons the ANC is a communist organization.
Right. Now, it's interesting you say that Thabo Mbeki was a snake, because another snake was clearly F.W. de Klerk. And F.W. de Klerk had this to say about P.W. Botha, and I'll just quote. He says, "Personally, my relationship with P.W. Botha was often strained. I did not like his overbearing leadership style and was opposed to the intrusion of the State Security Council system into virtually every facet of government. After I became leader of the National Party in February 1989, I did my best to ensure that P.W. Botha would be able to end his term as president with full dignity and decorum. Unfortunately, this was not to be. What's your response to that?
Oh man, there's a ton of stuff there. Okay, let me tell you a little bit of history here, because there are some videos that I went and found, and I will put them out. Let me tell you, PW Botha was the president. He was doing his thing, and then all of a sudden, a bunch of strange things started happening, and he appeared on TV. As I recall from memory, he appeared on TV twice. The first time he appeared on TV, he said something like, people in his cabinet have come to him and told him to resign. They've told him to resign over his health. And he said that no, there's nothing wrong with his health, and no, he's not going to resign. And then a short while after that, suddenly he's rushed to hospital or something. And there is a health scare relating to him.
Just to interrupt you for a second there, Jan. On the 18th of January 1989, PW Botha, then aged 73, suffered a mild stroke which prevented him from attending a meeting with Namibian political leaders on the 20th of January 1989. Back to you.
That's probably the incident we're talking about. Right. So after he'd been talking about his health, then suddenly later he has this sudden health problem. And then he goes onto TV after some time, and he tells people that, and there's this little piece is available. I downloaded it the other day. And he tells people that members of his cabinet are like no longer listening to him. People are sort of ignoring him, and that, if people aren't carrying out his orders, then, they're basically rebelling against him. And in there, he even mentions something. He mentions something about F.W. de Klerk and PW Botha going to Britain. And so there are things that start happening where F.W. de Klerk and PW Botha start ignoring him and doing their own thing. And there's also another instance. There was an article I think I published on my website. There was another instance where another minister in the government, I don't know his name, but there was another minister who suddenly resigned, and he said that he's resigning because there's all kinds of like infighting. There was an Afrikaans word he used for it. I can't remember the exact term. But let me tell you, before F.W. de Klerk came to be president, there was some kind of nonsense that they were busy with among the other whites. And another thing that I saw in my notes, in my discussions with PW, and I think this might come from, I'm not sure if the source is General Milan, but apparently F.W. de Klerk also went to Russia. And after he'd been to Russia, he came back and he changed his policies. Another thing that F.W. de Klerk did was he went to America, and he gave a talk or a news conference in front of the cameras with the first President Bush Sr.
Right.
In front of the cameras with Bush Sr., he stands there and he says, the negotiation process in South Africa is irreversible. All of a sudden, the process is irreversible. Meanwhile, if you look at the things that F.W. de Klerk had told the whites when they were doing the referendum had been about, do we carry on with negotiations? Because F.W. de Klerk originally said that this is power sharing. This is not a handover. But as the years go by, suddenly it becomes a handover. But the whites aren't asked about that. And the turning point seems to be this visit to President Bush. So he went to Britain. And Britain, I don't think is friendly to the Boers. He went to Britain. He went to Russia. He went to America. He was doing all kinds of things. So F.W. de Klerk was busy with all kinds of other nonsense that white South Africans didn't know about, and he probably never told them what really went on in those discussions. I think that there's a whole bunch of stuff there. There is one thing I must mention in my notes. PW Botha told me that at a point F.W. de Klerk visited him, I think more than once, but he told me that on the one visit, he took F.W. de Klerk on over the handing over of the country. And he told FW that the reason he handed over the country was that he was being paid off to do this. He specifically cited the Nobel Peace Prize. He specifically mentioned the Jewish organization B'nai B'rith. But he said to me, if I remember correctly, I'll double check in my notes, but as I understand it, that particular discussion that he had with FW in his house, it was recorded.
Wow.
So somewhere, somebody has got that recording.
Wow. Wouldn't
that
that
would
be
be
a
a recording.
bombshell?
That would be a bombshell. It's what he told FW de Klerk, and that exists somewhere.
Wow. I'd love to know where that is. Now, just talk, you mentioned PW Botha, and his name keeps on coming up. I believe he was South Africa's Henry Kissinger, basically just a stooge for the New World Order. What are your thoughts about PW Botha?
Oh man, PW Botha. I originally, when I was younger and I saw PW Botha on the TV, he used to come to Rhodesia and talk to us. And then I saw him in South Africa when I lived in South Africa. I liked PW Botha. I thought he was a very personable guy. He was very, very good. And I liked him. I thought he was a great guy. But I will tell you where my viewpoint of PW Botha started changing was when I was doing research for Government by Deception, and I started talking to former military officers. Former military officers. Oh, man. And the guy who gave me the most dirt on PW Botha was General Tini Groenewald. Tini Groenewald absolutely detested PW Botha. He regarded him as garbage. He told me that PW Botha sold out every single secret that South Africa had.
Wow.
He said PW Botha would sell South Africa's secrets to anybody, even to the Russians. There was nobody that PW Botha would not sell the secrets to. And I'll tell you something more about PW and Tini Groenewald. PW told me that the head of the CIA at the time, a guy named Casey, I think it's Casey, Casey. Casey came to South Africa and met with PW Botha. Casey told PW, he said, we Americans, we don't know enough about Africa, and we'll be turning to you guys for advice. PW said he really liked Casey. He said Casey was also a staunch guy, etc. So he liked the head of the CIA. Now, General Tini Groenewald told me that he also met the head of the CIA, and I'm assuming that it's the same guy, that it's also Casey, because I don't think Tini Groenewald named the guy. But Tini Groenewald told me that the head of the CIA told him that in all the CIA operations in the whole world, they had never come across a guy as corrupt as PW Botha.
Wow.
He said, that guy is dirt. So, all the things that went on there. This is why I keep saying to people, when I read books, when I talk to people and the various things, and even my discussions with PW, I must tell you that there are so many things that I think are hidden. I think that 90% of the real politics of what went on in this country in the 1980s was never really told. And the leaders would only say like very mild things. It's, oh, you know, we're sitting in a situation of total war. And then the liberal mass media, the backstabbing, anti-Boer, anti-government, liberal mass media in South Africa, that all mocked this kind of stuff. Oh, what are you talking about? What's happening? There's nothing. You're just making this stuff up. You people in the National Party are just inventing this stuff. No, I think the National Party told a lot of truth. And I think that they didn't even tell people the full horror of things that were really going on. But ultimately, as I see it, the pressure was put on the leaders. The leaders were broken down. And of course, coming back to why did PW have to leave? Well, PW would never have handed over the country to the blacks. And it is very clear. And you said, for example, that PW said the blacks wouldn't be able to
govern a country,
wouldn't be able to run the country.
Yeah.
I have seen a similar quote. In fact, I've got a screenshot from the social media where a black person quotes PW Botha and says, actually, we've been unable to prove him wrong. He's been right. Actually, we can't run the country. So
I've actually got that video clip.
Ah, nice. I would like to get a copy of it, if I may.
Absolutely. I'll just have to dig it up. But yeah, PW Botha talking and saying that, you know, you're crazy to hand the country over to a black government. Now, just yeah, carry on. Back to
if I may just my apologies. So as I see it, the pressure on South Africa was growing, and they were trying to break the politicians.
Yeah.
And they were trying to get PW to hand over the country to the blacks, but he refused.
Right.
He made reforms, he made changes, but he never was going to hand over to the communist terrorist Nelson Mandela. And the other thing also about the state security services is that, you know, the state, and that includes the South African police, I must tell you, because remember, there were the police, the security police, all of these organizations were Afrikaner dominated, and they were keeping us safe in our beds at night. Okay. And this business of the state security sticking their nose into all affairs, I think that PW Botha was doing the right thing. In fact, when that disgusting two-faced snake FW came and gave away the country, one of the first things he did was he fired generals. He was firing generals left, right, and center, including even a police general. He actually engaged in a purge of the generals. So, you know, if the top politician comes, he fires all the generals, then you got to ask yourself, why is he firing these generals? And of course, the reason is he's doing a purge of the generals because the generals are going to refuse to do what he's they're going to refuse to carry out his orders.
Yeah.
You know, so yeah.
If we go back,
I think that they had to get rid of PW.
Yeah.
They had to get rid of PW because that was the only way that they could get this country to be handed over. And that's very important. That whatever PW's faults, he wasn't disloyal and he did not betray the whites. Never.
Yeah. And in fact, back in 1982, the reforms that PW Botha brought in went too far for a group of National Party hardliners like Education Minister Andries Troenecht, who then basically broke away to form the Conservative Party. Those must have been pretty traumatic times for PW Botha, because, you know, here he was trying to move in the direction that would appease the rest of the world, and now you've got part of his party setting up an alternative conservative party. Do you want to take us through that period?
Yeah, interestingly enough, I actually liked Treurnig. And I actually even wrote a letter to Andries Treurnig, and he replied to me. I need to hunt through my archives, my physical archives, because he wrote a very nice reply. I actually supported the more hardcore stance. You see, one of the things you've got to be careful of, Scott, is that when the whites are put under pressure to start making changes, this is true for Rhodesia as well, okay? And Ian Smith used to warn about this. Ian Smith used to talk about what he called the slippery slope of appeasement.
Yeah.
So once you start going down that path where you start changing the country's laws, you got to be careful, because as you change it, you might get to a point of no return where you lose control of everything. So PW Botha was willing to engage in change up to a point, but there was a point where he was still digging his heels in. And so he never let Mandela out of jail, and he also refused to unban the ANC. Whereas those are the things that de Klerk did, you see. But as PW was beginning to do his reform, you did get people who were hardcore, and I fell into that because I was concerned that any move that weakens white power is bad. So I quite liked the Conservative Party, but Treurnig died. I think Treurnig died, and that was pretty much the end of the Conservative Party. You also had the AWB. The AWB was also becoming very strong, because the AWB, I have a soft spot for the AWB. The AWB represents the poorer whites. It represents the poorer Afrikaans whites. And they show that they showed that they were willing to fight the blacks. So you have the National Party that is now under a lot of pressure, and it's starting to move. But the question is, how far will it move? And it's starting to stress other whites. You also have the HNP. The one political party that I will tell you that I have unbelievable respect for now with time is the HNP. The HNP is the one political party that told the whites the truth all along, and nobody listened. But the HNP, the AWB, the Conservatives, as PW was reforming, all these other whites were starting to kick off. And you had guys like, who's that guy who went and shot Chris Hani? You had all those blokes starting to become hardcore as these whites are realizing that, we got to get ready for a fight. And so it becomes a tricky thing. It's not a pretty thing. So now the whites are also split, okay? The whites are split. And ultimately, I must tell you, the white right is actually always correct, ultimately. And unfortunately, when the National Party started giving way, then you also had the National Party sort of controlling the AWB, so that the AWB doesn't take over. It's a miserable thing. But out of this miserable thing, I think PW did as good as he could.
Yeah.
You can't fault him. He never actually handed over the country, and the military power of South Africa right to the end was very powerful, including the police. They were very, very effective. The handover of South Africa is a thing that is a 100% FW de Klerk thing. End of story. They broke the National Party. The weaklings took over, and they kicked PW out.
Yeah. Well,
in order to hand over.
Eugene de Blanche obviously headed up the RVB, and he met a very untimely death on his farm. That was very, very sad what happened there. I mean, I really think that in many ways he symbolized hope for largely the Boer population in South Africa. And once he was taken out, I think a lot of the wind went out of the sails of the resistance against what was happening. What are your thoughts about that?
Definitely, definitely. Eugene de Blanche, you know, if PW Botha was one level of resistance, Eugene de Blanche was the real grassroots resistance. People who were in the AWB told me that at the peak of its power, it had 900,000 members.
Wow.
900,000. It was freaking huge. You know, the AWB had the ability to be what you could call a militia army that would have gone and fought the blacks, man. And I mean, there were whites, lower class whites, men and women, man, who were willing to just take on these blacks and fight the blacks, you know, with their weapons themselves.
Yeah.
And you know, they got nothing but a bad rap all the time from all these wise asses in politics, whereas they represented the real thing. In my African Crisis archives, I will find and return to you with more stuff about the death of Eugene de Blanche. I have serious issues with the death of Eugene de Blanche. I will tell you, in my personal view, it was not an accident. It was an assassination, and I will tell you who I believe was behind the death of Eugene de Blanche. But let me go dig into my archives.
Right.
I'll come back to you.
Right. Okay. Now, the other side of this, which we haven't touched on, is the Broederbond. Now, PW Botha was very involved in the Broederbond, but then left it near the end. Why did he leave the Broederbond?
I don't recall him telling me why. I'm not sure if he implied that they were becoming corrupt or something. There was something, but I will have to check further in my notes if he said anything. Offhand, I can't remember any particular reason why. I'm not negative in my view of the Broederbond, but then again, I've only read one book about it, and that's the book that was published in the 1970s by the liberals, and they called it the Super Afrikaners. And this was the liberals exposing the secret power behind the National Party. And I quite liked the gist of the story that I got out of that, though I'd like to actually check some other documentaries and things later to look more into it. But my understanding of the Broederbond is that the Broederbond originally was started after the Second Anglo-Boer War. That a lot of these Boers were then trying to figure out how are they going to get some kind of power and how can they defend themselves. You see, what people don't realize is that when the British conquered South Africa, the Boers became second-rate citizens. The Boers were actually discriminated against by the English. Okay, in South Africa, I had an uncle on my mother's side. I had an uncle who told me, I think it was in the 1920s or sometime, not sure if it's 1920s, 1930s. He told me he was trying to get into business, and he said to me, if you were Afrikaans, you were not allowed into business. So business was dominated by English-speaking people.
Yeah.
So the Boere basically, all the Afrikaans speakers, so the Boere basically formed, and it could be the people they refer to as the Boere and the Cape Dutch. I'm not going to go into that, but let's say all the Afrikaans speakers came to realize that they need to form organizations. And they basically started building their own organizations that were duplicates of everything that the English had. So what they did was they built their own banks. They started their own banks, the original one. being Volkskas. They started their own insurance companies, Sanlam. They
Yeah.
started their own media organizations. They started their own what's that British thing, that boys organization, the Voortrekkers. They started that. They started cultural organizations and everything so that Afrikaans people could do business with other Afrikaans people, support their own banks, and ultimately the big creation out of this was the National Party. So you must understand that under General Smuts, South Africa was very liberal, and the National Party came along, and it was Afrikaans dominated, and it was very racist, and it came to bring back nationalism, and they actually set out to unite all whites and to make South Africa a racial creation. And the big event was the victory in 1948 when the National Party came to power.
Yeah.
It sent shockwaves through the liberal and communist ranks. So the Broederbond was responsible. The Broederbond infiltrated everything. The Broederbond infiltrated the police, infiltrated the army, infiltrated everything. So the things they couldn't create duplicates of, they infiltrated them until they got people to the top. And so they took over all of South Africa. These Afrikaans people took over South Africa. And the Broederbond drove all of this. So the Broederbond drove the National Party. The Broederbond drove the media, the banks, everything. And so I see the Broederbond as the rise of the Boers and the Afrikaners in taking over South Africa and grabbing it away from the British.
Right.
And grabbing it away from them, and they created the policy of apartheid.
No.
And though later you'll see even PW Botha ducks and dives on the issue of apartheid, but I don't see the Broederbond as a bad thing. I think what happened, I will finish shortly. I think what happened is that the Broederbond itself became infiltrated and corrupted, and later it broke up, and it went some other path. It still exists. It's called the Afrikaner Bond, and they should have tons of money. They had hundreds of millions of rands back then already.
Yeah.
They were moving money. They may be worth many billions. So they still exist, and the question is, what things do they still control?
Right.
Possibly AfriForum and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But they're still around. They're there.
Okay, well, it's interesting because when I worked at the bank in Escort, this is back in the late 1970s, early 1980s, a farmer moved into the district. He actually bought huge maize farms between the Drakensberg and Escort, which is a fantastic farming area. And he was planting maize, and he had he had all this maize. And we were told in the bank, he was a client of Barclays Bank, which is now, I think, First National Bank. But he was a client of our branch. And before he even came in, we were warned that he was a senior member of the Broederbond and that he should be treated with utmost respect. We were warned by our head office. And when this guy came into the branch, you said, yes, sir, no, sir, 3 bags full, sir, because he was the senior member of the Broederbond. And he literally bought all these farms. I don't know where he got the cash, but, I guess that was part of being a senior member of the Broederbond.
Yeah, it was Afrikaans power. You can say the Broederbond was the Freemasons of the Boere Afrikaners.
Yeah.
The Broederbond. That's true. And in the Super Afrikaners, they published the names of 10,000 of the members, and in there you will see lots of those same politicians. Lots of the politicians in the National Party were members of the Broederbond. So, in many ways, this is like terrorism, for example. I don't want to attack the Broederbond because in a world of secret societies, and if you go and you look at the creation of the United States, the founding fathers of America were mostly Freemasons, okay?
Yeah.
And their Freemason stuff sits on the American dollar bills to this day.
Yeah.
You know, the all-seeing eye, the pyramid, all that. So it was Freemasons who created America. And I think that in a world of secrecy and secret organizations, that the only way that any group of people can fight back is to form your own secret society, because a secret society has got certain advantages. There are things that the secret society can do that allow that they can succeed at, and the concept works. So the only way for the Boere Afrikaners to regain control of South Africa is form their secret society, form their political party, etc. In the same way that the blacks went and formed their political party to save them, you know. And, you know, it's also like terrorism in the sense that if you are a terrorist and you function in a certain way, you've got certain advantages. And there are certain things terrorists can do that make it almost impossible to fight them. And ultimately, in any battle, you've got to go down. There's a term that says the low man determines the fight.
Right.
So in other words, if somebody's got dirtier tricks than you, and they beat you because of their dirty tricks, you eventually have to go down to their level and fight them on their level. So I think I don't want to knock these people because they're trying to survive. And ultimately the National Party and the Broederbond was racist, and it kept South Africa white, and it gave white power, and it also brought about white unity. It united the whites.
Yeah.
And I mean, so I don't want to knock them. You know, I'm a defender of apartheid, actually.
Right.
I defend it. I think it was. I think they were doing what they could.
Yeah.
Blacks do the same thing when they get a chance. Make no mistake.
Yeah. Well, what's happening in South Africa now is like a bad marriage. It's just, you know, going absolutely crazy. Now, just getting back to PW and your stay at his place, was there any particularly interesting things you saw at his house? And how was his health? Because the media suggested he was senile at this time.
Yes, you see, let's start with his health. Again, before I went to PW Botha, the mass media, the lying mass media, man, the mass media are nothing but a propaganda organization. The mass media was saying things like, oh, you know, PW Botha, he's senile. They probably were trying to find excuses for reasons to not interview him. So they'd say things like, oh, he's senile, he's lost his mind, etc. When I started speaking to him, I realized, no, there's nothing wrong with his mind. In fact, his mind is sharp. And when I was at his house, and I mean, every meal I had was with him and his wife. And when I was at his house, I had breakfast, lunch, and supper with them. He would even start cracking jokes. He'd start telling jokes and things, and his mind was fully active. He was phoning people. He would talk to me. He would talk to other people on the phone. I could listen to him talking to others, and he's absolutely fine. In fact, to give you an idea of how two-faced the mass media is, and I caught them out a bit, was just before I arrived at his place, because I flew down, about a day or two before I left, his wife phoned me, and she told me that somebody in one of the Afrikaans media organizations in the newspaper Rapport, she told me that somebody at Rapport told her that there is an order at Rapport that all the journalists have been told they must never do stories about PW Botha. So I went on to African Crisis, and at that time I had quite an audience.
Yeah.
And I published what she said. And I kid you not, when in the next few days, by the time I got to him, I'd been there like 2 days, and a report suddenly phones him and says, "Oh, we want to send a journalist and over to come and see you." And when I was there, the very next day, the journalist arrived, a nice, attractive female Afrikaans journalist and a white male cameraman. They arrived there, and I was sitting inside his lounge looking through the glass window as the rapport people were busy interviewing him, and they were all friendly and they were busy talking. "Oh, PW, how are things going with you?" And afterwards they went back and they wrote a lovely story about it, etc. All during that time. Bunch of two-faced snakes.
Yeah, I seem to remember at some time during the last 20 years in South Africa, the media actually pointed their finger at you and called you all sorts of terrible things. But that's a story for another day. Because look, the same thing has happened to me here in Australia, and we know how they work. They love labeling people who don't fit their copybook. I mean, they're just absolute fake. Now let's get back to comment that Marlena made.
I'm not finished. Can I finish?
Yeah, please go ahead.
You know.
Just before you do.
Okay, so that
Jan,
is one thing.
Just before you do, I just want to tell you what Marlena said, which is interesting. She said, Andries Treurnig was my mother's uncle on her mother's side. Now, that's just a tidbit of information. Okay, back to you.
Oh, wow. Nice. Okay, the other thing that I went around his house. He showed me his various things.
Yeah.
And he also took me to his actual office. And he had his office with his library, but he didn't go there often. I've got a photograph in his office. On his desk was the apartheid flag, which is now illegal in South Africa. But I've got a photo of it. That flag was on his desk, and he had he had an interesting exercise bicycle, etc. But while I was looking through his library, I came across a little book on nuclear weapons. And I asked him if I could borrow the little book. And I borrowed it, and during the 5 days that I was there, I read through the little book. Unfortunately, I never photographed it or anything like that, and I could really kick myself with regard to it.
Yeah.
The little book was the most interesting thing I saw. It was a little white book. It was round about 100 or so pages, 100 or a bit more than 100 pages long. The little book, there were only 250 copies of the little book.
Wow.
The book, I can't remember the title. The book was written by the people who did the nuclear weapons program of South Africa.
Wow.
And only 250 copies were printed, and they were autographed and given to specific people, PW Botha being one of them. And I read through this little book. It had pictures, etc. And I want to tell you, it blew my mind. In a nutshell, can you believe that South Africa's entire nuclear industry, including the making of nuclear weapons, was done by approximately 1,000 white people, men and women, from the scientists down to the technicians, etc. About 1,000 people were responsible for everything to do with the nuclear stuff, including the building of the nuclear bombs. I later discovered that the nuclear bombs, can you believe that they built the nuclear bombs underground? They actually built the nuclear bombs in Pretoria, in the capital city of Pretoria. There were certain buildings, and they were building the components for the nuclear bombs underground in buildings in Pretoria.
Wow.
It wasn't like they went out into the desert to do it. They were doing it in Pretoria. And the whole story was in there. I found it so fascinating. The one thing I would like to ask, if it's ever possible, and I have already tried, is if ever we can get some member of PW Botha's family to just scan that little book for us and give it to somebody and just put it out for free for everybody to read on the internet, please.
How
That
many
book
pages
is an
was it?
amazing book.
How many pages?
It wasn't big. It
No.
wasn't big. It was probably between 100 to 150 pages max.
Wow.
It wasn't big, man.
Wow. Was there anything else
but
interesting?
it was the story of the nuclear.
Yeah.
That to me was the most interesting thing. Another thing was he had a photograph of the astronauts on the moon,
Yeah.
and he was quite proud of the fact that one of the astronauts came to visit him.
Oh,
and
wow.
and he, I'm not sure if it's Aldrin who visited him, but one of the astronauts visited him and gave him the photo, and he proudly put it on his wall.
Wow.
Those are the most important things.
Now, did he ever discuss the international pressure and war against South Africa or the whites of Southern Africa?
Among the things that we did discuss was he spoke about Rhodesia, the Portuguese, and South Africa all being under total war, that there is a move to destroy us all. And that the same people, basically the same people who want South Africa destroyed are the same people who are destroying the Portuguese and Rhodesia.
Well, that's a new world order.
You know, that's the communists and their new world order buddies.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Now, what I'm going to do, Jan, is I'm going to wrap the live stream up soon. We've been going for an hour and a half, and it's been absolutely fascinating hearing about your time with PW. But before I do, PW died of a heart attack at his home on Tuesday, the 11th of October, 2006, aged 90. What were your immediate thoughts when you heard of his death?
Well, I must tell you, I was very shocked. In fact, what happened was I had left his house and I'd come back home.
Because just to be clear, Jan, just to be clear, he died only days after you stayed with him.
Yes, this is the freaky part. So listen to this. I've got photographs of him that I took. I must be among the last people who ever took photographs of PW Botha. It was the Rapport people and myself who were probably the last people to ever take photographs of him. And after I left, I was at home. I woke up 6 o'clock one morning, and I switched on my radio alarm. And as I was snoozing, the news came on, and they said that PW Botha passed away. And I was absolutely shocked. I couldn't believe it. I was like, no ways. I last saw him alive 11 days ago, and he was absolutely fine. And he and I, we had discussed his health. We discussed his health, and a topic that has come up before, and I'm going to put it out there because I think that there's more to the events of PW Botha than meet the eye. That a long time ago there was a Russian ex-KGB guy called Golitsyn, and in 1984 Golitsyn wrote a book called New Lies for Old, and it was a big expose of the Soviet Union. Golitsyn made the point that the Russians have got a poison that can kill you. A poison that can give you a heart attack, and you will get a heart attack, and it'll be like natural. You will die of natural causes, and when they examine you, they'll think that it was just your health that gave in. But if you look at PW Botha, you'll see he had this weird heart attack back in 1988 at a very convenient time, and then and so forth. And then you'll see that suddenly he just drops dead. And I must tell you, I asked the question, and I even raised the issue with him when I was at his house. I said to him, back in 1988, weren't you poisoned? Didn't somebody poison you? And we actually kind of discussed that, and he himself was kind of half open to that idea. So I personally am just plain suspicious. Okay, I'm plain suspicious. I can't say anything with certainty, but I found it very weird. And you know what? In the year 2006, with that DVD of the interview that came out, and then me writing a whole bunch of articles, more and more people were getting interested in PW Botha, and the next thing you know, boom, he's dead.
Yeah. Well,
I am very suspicious.
Well, what I'd say about the timing of the other incident, which happened in the 1980s, where he had the stroke in January, that was 2 days before he was supposed to attend a very important discussion about the independence of Southwest Africa, which was then to become Namibia. And because he had the stroke, he couldn't attend it. And he was very determined to keep Southwest Africa as part of South Africa. So you know, what you're saying makes sense, because by putting him in that health position, he wouldn't attend what was a very, very important meeting.
Yes, and then others could turn around and say, oh, well, you see, his health is bad. That's why we have to put de Klerk in. Because remember, de Klerk just came in. He wasn't even voted in or didn't stand for election or nothing. Yeah. And you're right. You mentioned the importance of Namibia, German Southwest Africa. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right.
The handover. Absolutely. The beginning of the end.
Now, what I'm going to do to wrap up, Jan, is I've got a bunch of questions here from people that I want to put to you. Jan Fillion has said, hang on, that's a personal message, so I won't bring that up here in our discussion. John Moslin has said, is the nuclear reactor still working at Pelindaba?
I wouldn't know. What I do remember discussing with PW Botha about nuclear stuff was he said to me that South Africa, meaning the whites, we still have got nuclear knowledge, important nuclear knowledge. But he said some of the scientists are getting old and they're dying. And he specifically mentioned a certain doctor. It's in my notes here. But he said that this was the guy who started the whole process of nuclear uranium enrichment. Wow. And I think that guy has probably died. So I suspect by now that lots of our guys are dead, and that we may have lost some of our best minds by now. So I don't know the full state of the situation. I do know that Koeberg is running quite well, and I'm not sure if Koeberg still has got some white nuclear scientists there, or who runs it. I don't know.
Right. Well, if Tanel has any sort of guidance as to what would be happening, it wouldn't be good with any chance of South Africa getting back into that area. Okay, now Jaguar or Clive has asked, please ask Jan about the rumors that Nelson Mandela was executed and the man we know was an imposter.
That I would not buy at all. That I would not buy at all. In fact, you know, one of the photos I found in my archives, I found a photo of Nelson Mandela's new prison building. You know, he actually, towards the end of his time in jail, they actually put him in a lovely house. He's got a house with a swimming pool. He was treated well. And you know something about Mandela? You know, Mandela was found guilty of treason.
Yeah.
And in that Rivonia trial. Mandela should have been executed. Mandela should have been executed back then in the early 1960s, but he wasn't. And I suspect that also, that there's some kind of weird pressure, weird politics as to why the South African government did not execute Nelson Mandela. So the mere fact that he stuck around, I think other people were protecting him, whether it was pressure from overseas or whether they just believed that executing him would turn him into a hero. I don't know, but there is some reason why didn't they carry out the law and execute him? Because he should have been.
Well, it's interesting that Mandela was, after he came out of prison, suddenly a 33rd degree Freemason. And there are photos of him, wearing the sort of the garb that they wear. And especially the one with the big white crosses on a black, it's like a tunic. I don't know if you've seen those, but he's standing next to prominent people in these sort of clearly secret society organization.
Well, what I will say is that I have actually come across that many black politicians in Africa in recent times, I'm talking recent times, have become Freemasons. So Mandela had many friends, including Jews. So Mandela could have all kinds of connections. He could have all kinds of connections. No question about it. But I wouldn't say that he was killed and you're seeing a copy. No, I don't buy that.
Yeah. Now, Shirley Dewhurst has asked, please ask Jan about Kortbroek.
Now, that's interesting. Van Schalkwyk, I think, is his name. If that's interesting, I remember this guy vaguely now, but I remember he was a very important player in the final days of the National Party. And just as I was going through my notes here, as I was going through my notes of my discussions with PW, he actually said there that Kortbroek was a member of national intelligence, that he was actually taken in as a spy. So I don't know the rest of it. I'd have to refresh my memory on Kortbroek, but I remember that he and that other guy, the guy that I refer to as the Canary, he was another one of the clowns in the final days. I can't remember all the issues he got up to now.
Right.
But so he may have been working for national intelligence.
So they were the guys undermining the status quo.
There must be a lot of stuff that went on, I must tell you.
Yeah.
Lots.
Okay, now Fiona Timms has said, I gathered that plots to hand over South Africa to the blacks began as early as the 1930s. Could Jan expand on that, please?
That I haven't heard about. I haven't dug into South African history going that far. But let me put it this way. South Africa in and of itself is such an important nation with so much wealth that, ever since the British conquered the Boers and crushed the Boer republics, that I don't think that South Africa has ever been truly free. That coming to seize the wealth of the Boer republics, because they had gold and diamonds, that stacks of it. I think at the time, remember, the gold back then meant something because all currencies were backed by gold at that time. And I stand to be corrected, but I think that the two Boer republics had 1/4 of all the gold in the world.
Wow.
At that time.
Yeah.
And that's why the British came and looked for any freaking excuse to kill the Boers and crush them, It had nothing. It had nothing to do with the Uitlanders and
No,
the
of course not.
maltreatment of the. It had nothing to do with that. They came here to capture the super incredible wealth of the Boers.
And that was
And
directly
once
for
they
the
grabbed
Rothschilds.
it, you had
That was directly for the Rothschilds.
absolutely. Absolutely. The Rothschilds even sent the British soldiers a Christmas. The Rothschilds sent every single British soldier a Christmas card and a present. Every single. And the British, in order to conquer the handful of Boers, had to bring in almost 500,000 troops.
Yeah.
And the Rothschilds personally paid for all their stuff. So I think that in the time of South Africa, this is my interpretation when I look at history, is that the Boere Afrikaners tried to regain political control because they lost control of everything. They lost control of the money, the politics, the military, the everything. And they tried to figure out a way to regain some power in South Africa. And that's where the Broederbond comes from. And apartheid, actually, in my view, was the 48 years that the Boere Afrikaners managed to control South Africa mostly. They managed to get political and military control of South Africa, but they did not have full control of all the other stuff. And you've still got all those British links, etc. I don't think that South Africa is a fully independent state. That a nation like Britain is the part owner of South Africa, and the Americans are also now floating around. I don't think this country is truly free or has ever been truly free, even under black rule. Even the blacks don't have full control of it.
Well, look at Lord Renwick. He always keeps on popping up next to Julius Malema, and it's interesting that other billionaires are starting to now pop up next to Lord Renwick, and I'm talking about South African billionaires. I'm not going to mention the person's name here, but some people watching tonight will know who I'm talking about. I also just want to mention, we're talking about billionaires, the fact you talked about the taxi industry was started by PW Botha, and was supposed to be in the hands of the blacks. The biggest taxi or black taxi owner in South Africa today is Johan Rupert. Isn't that interesting?
No.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, you see, what you've probably got is a new, let's call it Broederbond or Freemason or whatever you want to call it, and it's got money, and it's busy with its games.
Yeah.
And yeah.
All right. Well, look, Jan, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Is there something you'd like to just say in closing about PW Botha and any particular message you feel that he would like to give to South Africa? Oh, and just a short while ago, just for the record, I moved the camera and I showed the apartheid flag on my wall here in my room, because I fly it very, very I'm very proud to have one of these flags, and I'll just quickly point to it again. There it is on the wall. And yeah, I mean, to me, it's a symbol of hope for people against the oppression of the New World Order. That's my views anyway. Jan, back to you.
Yeah, well, I think in terms of a message, this comes out also in that interview. I will send you the link in the next 30 minutes. In his interview, he's asked about the future of the Rainbow Nation, and he laughs at it, and he says, well, there's no such thing as a Rainbow Nation, and he basically regards the country as a mess. He also said to me something like, die ANC is so deurmekaar soos 'n kraaines. And but his message to the people, including the young people who've left the country, he said, go and acquire knowledge and later come back to South Africa and fight for a new dispensation. He did not see this as the end of the Boere and that kind of thing. He did not see that as the end of them. And in fact, he actually reads out, there's something he loves about the Boers. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the author of Sherlock Holmes, I think it is, he wrote a lovely piece about the Boers. And PW Botha loves that piece to bits. But I agree with the view that nothing is over and the Boers mustn't quit, and no white South Africans should quit. I don't think the current system is going to deliver anything to us. PW Botha himself definitely didn't think that either. I think that whites need to figure out some new system, whether it's secession or whatever it is, but there's got to be something, and I think that we must work towards something, definitely.
Right. Well,
so and a final one.
Yeah.
I asked him if he thought, he and I discussed the issue of white unity. Did he think white unity is possible? And he said yes. He said white unity in South Africa is definitely possible. The English and the Afrikaans people did work together, and it can be done again. And
Right.
I definitely think that's the way to go.
Right. Well, just getting back to secession, I think the Western Cape breaking away and setting up a separate state would be an incredible move. And I'm pretty sure that if they did it right, a lot of expat South Africans would return to South Africa. And I'm talking about the brain drain people.
Are you speaking about Hein Marx and the ULA?
There are a number of organizations. There's Cape Exit, there's ULA, there's the Cape Independence Movement that Dr. Peter Hammond is actually sort of like the fellow who's sort of moderating the discussions they have. There are a number of groups that are now moving towards independence in the Western Cape.
That would be awesome. We need. I personally think that South Africa anyway is going to break up, and in fact, I think Africa as a whole is still going to be torn apart, and I don't think it's that far into the future.
Right.
So I think you will eventually find others even breaking away. The Zulus might even break away eventually. So the whole thing is for the whites to grab a chunk of territory for themselves. Obviously, the ultimate prize would be the return of the Boer republics.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Jan, thank you so much for joining us tonight. There's so much we could be talking about. We'd be going on for hours. Now, I do have to wrap this up because we've been going for 2 hours. And I do apologize once again that we got you on a bit late, but it was necessary that people knew what happened with our website earlier today. Take care and have a great evening.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me on.
And
thanks very much.
And
we'll chat again.
Yeah, we look forward to having you on again on another subject.
Okay, bye.
Okay, Jan, take care. Bye for now. All right, guys, that was Jan Lamprecht. Always fascinating talking to Jan. He's someone who really knows his history in South Africa and looks at it from basically a credible perspective, unlike the fake mainstream media, which we did make reference to during this discussion. Have a great evening, and I'll see you tomorrow night at 8 p.m. Johannesburg time. We've got a very, very interesting subject to talk about then. And I will go out with our favorite Boer song. I think it's pretty pertinent in light of what we've been talking about today. And that is, of course, Hier bly ek Boer. So here it goes. Let me just get it up on the screen.
Meer as 61,000 van ons voorvaders het op die grens vir ons gesterwe, sodat ons vry kan wees. Die is my land, die is my reg, hier is ek boer. Van stof is ek gemaak en sal ek terugkeer. Die Bybel is die woord waaruit ek leer, soos die grond
nag sal die vyand kom. Maar hier bly ek staan en ek draai nie om, want jy maak my nie bang nie. Hier bly ek boer. Die is my land waarvoor ek sal veg. Die is my bloed, my sweet, my rug. Die is die plek waar my voorvaders leef. Die is my land, hoor wat ek jou sê. Die is my land, wat my mense voor. Hier bly ek voor. Soos 'n blaassam in die somer wat vreugde bring. My oupa wat maniekiero kon sing, soos hy stap deur die lande. Hier was hy boer. My wortels lê diep in die grond geplant. Hy sien soos my pa, los ek vir jou die land, en jy hoef nie te vrees nie. Hier sal jy boer. Die is my land waarvoor ek sal veg. Die is my bloed, my sweet, my rug. Die is die plek waar my voorvaders leef. Die is my land, hoor wat ek jou sê. Die is my land, wat my mense voor. Hier bly ek voor. Die leeu sal kom, 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 die leeu sal kom.